Good evening, Nigerians. Yeah, welcome once more to Talking Health with Dr. Laz, your favorite health program on television. Yes, as usual on Tuesdays, we bring you the program on Africa Independent Television, AIT. My name is Dr. Laz Eze. Yes, last month was one of the most traumatic moments this year. Of course, we could say COVID-19 lockdown and a lot of issues brought a lot of trauma to some persons, but the events of the NSAS advocacy, especially the aftermath of the NSAS protests, that we had monumental damages and looting of properties, destruction of public utilities, and also destruction of hospitals, looting of at least 17 hospitals across 10 different states that we've been able to track. Last week, we discussed about the hospitals that were destroyed and how the health system might be helped to recover from that. But today, we are going to be looking at a different perspective. Whenever an issue of that gravity happens, it puts a lot of persons into trauma, whether it's the injuries that people sustained, those that lost their lives, as well as those whose properties were looted. It subjects them to a lot of mental trauma. How do they recover from this? How can we as a system minimize this? How can we help them to heal? These are some of the questions that are important to find answers to, because without such healing, we have a situation where just an ordinary event might just trigger another set of destructions, because bottled up anger can easily explode. So on the program today, I have a psychologist. I also have a journalist who will be joining me. And of course, the journalist will share an experience, and the psychologist will proffer solutions to mental healing. But after the break, I'm going to be introducing them further. Do not forget to follow us as usual on our social media platforms. Make comments, your suggestions, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel, all displayed on your screen at Talk Health Nigeria TV, and keep watching the program and making your suggestions. We'll be right back after this break. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Talking Health with Dr. Laz, your favorite health program on television. With me here in the studio is someone many of you know very well, Mr. Runcie Chidebe. Runcie Chidebe is a psychologist, but of course a global cancer advocate. So he's not talking about cancer today. That's why I found that he's putting out a pink tie, but he's wearing the hat as a psychologist to weigh in and, prefer what we need to do on individual levels and all that. Mr. Runcie, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Dr. Laz.
So today, let's talk a different aspect of health. Of course, your major area of love. As a young person, first of all, let me ask you how the entire NSAS protest, advocacy, and the aftermath, how did that make you feel?
Okay, thank you very much. As a person, I cannot really express in terms of words how, I felt, especially in terms of my mental health, trying to understand how many millions of Nigerians have flooded the streets to show their displeasure about police brutality. We have never seen anything like this in Nigeria. So this really sent a very strong message about how people really felt about this issue, and it shouldn't just be seen as just just something that comes and goes shortly. It should really be seen as something that has long-term impact on people and should be told that way.
Yes, something that have long-term impacts on people and should be treated as such. Yeah. Yes. So I asked that because everyone, not just young people, a lot of persons are deeply concerned. And what that protest represented wasn't just, the issue of police brutality, even though it was the trigger, but a lot of other issues came up you know, and we started reading a lot of stories, very traumatic stories. You know, I suffered some bouts of depression reading some of those stories. I couldn't sleep for some, you know, days, you know, and I could imagine how those who were directly affected could feel that way, you know. So Adaora Onyechere is a broadcast journalist, and she took to Twitter to share a story, something that happened 5 years ago. She's also currently the head of Women and Gender Affairs of African Union ECOSOC in Nigeria. You know, so we are going to, I had a conversation with her a couple of days ago on the experience, and it's something that is quite troubling. So let's listen to her, and we come back to discuss way forward.
Dr. Laz, and thank you for having me on your show. It's a privilege as always. And well done for the good job that you're doing.
Thank you.
It is significant right now, especially as we go through the process. And I say this because of the level of psychological, you know, trauma that victims or third victims, you know, third-person victims, those who have experienced or who have been part of the experience of losing someone to any form of violence at all. Not to even talk about, you know, in such a gruesome way. I say gruesome because the death of my uncle still leaves a stark picture in my mind. It is gore. It's like something that came out of a horror movie. 2015, to be precise, August 8th. My uncle's life was cut short at the age of 48. He had just been briefly, you know, come back from the United Kingdom for burial, and he was just coming in from the weekend. In fact, he was en route with his pregnant wife. While driving at the Lagos Expressway, he was stopped by policemen. Policemen who would rather wait by the corner of the road, would come to the middle of the road to stop a moving and oncoming vehicle. And of course, if you were the driver, you would panic and want to stop at a halt. And I think for him, that was the first sequence of the event, and he had to stop. And they asked him to come down from the car, and he said, "Please, may I park properly?" They said, "What has he got for them?" And he says he doesn't carry cash. And of course, you could hear from his accent. Of course, you could see his pregnant wife. And maybe they thought that was their field day, because they probably seen someone who is not usual, you know, around that time of the day or around the time of the country. And so he said, I don't carry cash. I don't carry cash on me. And please, may I even know why I'm being asked, you know, for money, you know, out of ignorance. And they told him that he feels like his journey just come. He should come and open the boot first, let them know what he's carrying. And he said, "Please, may I park properly?" And, you know, in between the conversation of give me money, and may I park properly, and he, out of obliging them, because of course these are gun-carrying men and they could be trigger happy, you never know. And so on his way to open the boot, an oncoming truck, you know, just by the side of the boat, you know, and my uncle is the type of person who is very high fashioned, and so he was wearing a waist, his belt had a waist chain on it, and so while the truck was driving past, the truck passed him and drew him by the chain by the waist, and so he was dragged on the road like, you know, a fugitive, and halfway into the distance, his body dismembered, and, you know, imagine that that sight, not just for people who were driving by, but the woman in the vehicle. And so the police and the members of the police team that were there, you know, took off. And that was how she had to put on SOS call. People who witnessed it had to come, call, you know, people who had a car. So you had to hold his body together to rush it to the hospital. And by the time he got to the hospital, of course, he gave up. He was already dead. And, you know, for me, I wasn't there, but I'm imagining, even just understanding that the wife was there, you know, and what she could have been through. And in receiving the body, you know, my mom had to go to Lagos to bring back the body, you know, because they were the closest. and had to find a way to have the body, put together, to be able to put it to the mortuary, and, waited for investigation, started making police report, calling for justice, we went to court, two of the people who did an AWOL were able to be found, but the main culprits were not. And, till today, my grandmom did not even know he was buried until after 2 weeks, because no one was willing to tell her how he had passed, and that, this son of hers who just came back briefly and would return back to his work was taken away by, people who had such a level of monstrosity and had no ethics, towards life. And, so even through the burial, people who didn't even want to come in, it was such a dark period, because for me, something I didn't see happening. And so that left my grandmom traumatized up till now. And she has this bouts of depression. My mom has never been the same, because her emotions are heightened. So after every little thing, she probably just balls up in tears. And so when someone is really in pain and hasn't healed, you can actually tell from their outbursts, their level of engagement, their withdrawal, and the way they converse. So for me, it's terrible, because he raised me. I'll practically say he raised me. I grew up with him in the UK when I was going to college and university. So to just one day wake up and I can't call Uncle Luke, we can't talk, I can't make life decisions, I can't relate with him, it's still a rude awakening for me. And when the hashtag NSAS started, for me, I said, oh wow, because I remember that, one of the things that my mom used to say every time when she was going through the period was that these people must pay for this action. There will be a day of reckoning. And for me, the hashtag NSAS was a day of reckoning. For me, it was a finality to having justice for victims of brutality by the SAS team.
Exactly. As I read your tweet, posting Uncle K's, your uncle's picture, and telling the story. And in fact, it was traumatic for me trying to imagine that kind of experience. And I also read through some comments, so looking at the effect it has on your mental health and that of your family, what do you think? Do you see the NSAS protest, how it happened, having a similar effect on anyone? The events that have happened in the past few weeks.
I think it's a sense of closure, in finding a lasting solution so that more lives don't get taken by such inhuman actions. Also the justice for victims who have died, so brutally in the hands of, the SAS team. And finally, I think that another area would be to find a safe space for mental healing for such victims, even those who have experienced the loss, of loved ones. There is no outpouring. There is no, counseling. How do people who deal with this? Imagine the number of persons who were coming out during the hashtag NSAS to say they have lost loved ones, how long they must have dealt with the pain, how long they must have lived without, justice, and what that does to your psyche as a person. And it only takes the grace of God that you don't become, vindictive or take laws into your hands. And it shows you the level and the height of distrust for the police department and why that is so over time, because there are lots of disgruntled people who know that the system does not protect them regardless. So I think that there should be a safe space for where people can talk, some level of exchange and outpouring, mental guidance on how to live post, the loss of a loved one, either by violence or by brutality.
Life may be cheap in this climb, some might say. That story, evokes a lot of emotions, and so many other stories that were told by different persons, and they saw the protest period as a period to empty their hearts with a lot of burden that they've brought over the years. We'll take a break, and when we return, Mr. Runcie Chidebe is going to be, discussing how people, so many persons who may have had similar trauma, from bad policing, from violent crimes, from anything, could get their healing. Do stay with us. We'll be right back shortly. Welcome back to Talking Health with Dr. Laz, your favorite health program on television. Before the break, we heard from the head of Gender and Women Affairs of African Union ECOSOC, Adaora Onyechere, who shared a gory story of how she lost her uncle 5 years ago due to bad policing. We use that as an example of what many persons, who may have lost their loved ones in the course of the aftermath of NSAS protest, but not just NSAS, Runcie, we have these violent crimes in different parts of the country. Boko Haram is still killing people. Yeah. We have the bandits. We have so many situations where many Nigerians get to grieve and get minimal support. So how would such persons heal sustainably?
Thank you very much. I mean, I was also really touched by this story, because this story clearly, let's give a background to this. In many stress that people pass through, it has different dimension. Okay. You have the distress, and then you have the ill stress. But generally, people just refer this as stress.
Yes.
But psychologically, there are dimensions. Ill stress has to do with the positive dimension of it, right? And then distress is the negative.
Right.
What we've experienced in NSAS has been people trying to suppress a large, significant amount of stressors that they have been through, grief that they have been through, pain, anger that they have been passing through for several months. And this was an opportunity to kind of express it using social media, sharing with people and sharing with different, different medium and otherwise.
So did that sharing of story kind of provide some elements of healing? Mental, psychological healing?
Absolutely, because, let's relate this to grief. Grief have different stages.
Okay.
One stage of grief is really about denial. And in many cases, people have passed through the level of denial already. Because at denial stage, we're like, oh, this cannot be happening to my uncle. This cannot be happening to my brother. But it has already happened. And then the next one that comes is anger.
Right.
And you see, it's the anger that people have suppressed that was like busted. It was more like a time bomb.
Yes.
And let's also be honest, this will also explode again, because many people do not really get the total healing they were expecting, because the next stage, in psychological stage in grief, is what we call bargain. At that stage, you are trying to bargain with yourself, bargain with the society, bargain with the framework around us.
Right.
The bargain is where we've missed it. We're missing it, and we're still missing it. Even in terms of the government wasn't providing a very good, framework for people to bargain and feel that they were heard. For instance, even the president.
But there was a period government was saying, okay, come with your leaders. You need to talk to some persons and all that.
So that is the problem.
Be considered as part of the bargain?
That is the problem. That would be considered as sort of the bargain. But you see, many people have actually lost trust. And in psychology, when people lose trust, it's so difficult to regain that. But you can regain that in a very good, transparent way that really clearly shows that you understand their emotion. You put yourself, not sympathy. What we have seen in the past few weeks is people showing sympathy instead of showing empathy.
Right.
And when we lost that empathy, for instance, the president's speech, many people allege that it does not have the kind of empathy they were looking for. It did not communicate that kind of, we felt your pain.
So would that have offered some level of psychological healing?
Absolutely. It would have really offered. It is the cross of bargaining.
Okay.
And in psychology, after the level of bargaining, that is where you move into depression. So many people saw that the bargain was not successful, either with themselves or with the society, with the community, with the government. Many people felt depressed. And don't forget, depression is like really, really bad.
Yes.
And that's why, since I've been talking, I always try to run away or stay away from the word mental health. Because in Nigeria, when you talk about mental health,
They
people really think
give
it's
it
about...
a lot of interpretations.
Exactly.
But the reality is we have to call it by its name.
You're right. But
because WHO defines health as a complete state of well-being of the physical, mental, and social well-being, and not just the absence of disease or infirmity.
But you see, the definition of different terms are really good, but we have to always define terms when we're talking about public awareness in a way you don't cause fear instead of bringing healing.
Right.
And that's why you keep using the word psychological support, so that people won't see it from the psychiatric part. Many people that have passed through...
Instead of psychotherapy,
exactly,
psychological support.
Exactly. So that is the dimension that I'm really speaking to. And in that regard, we really, really need a lot of psychological support to a lot of people.
Yes, talking about that psychological support, one may argue that, during the protest, it was, Adaora said that it offers some sense of closure.
Yeah.
It gave her some sense of justice and also kind of provides safe spaces. Those are some keywords she used. Perhaps for some persons who had been in pains of one form of police brutality or the other, felt that. But it's also been argued that the protests, the things that happened, those that lost their lives, particularly the things that happened after, the destructions all over the place, those that lost their properties. So we now have a new set of persons who are now in state of distress. So just in a couple of minutes before we round up, can you recommend to the individual, to organizations, the government, the actions we need to take, to support this new set of persons whose the events of the past few weeks may have gotten into distress, so that we don't have a situation where it will explode in the near future?
Yeah, so I will give recommendations in two ways. Scientifically, short-term and long-term.
Right.
Short-term is for people, individuals who have been through this, to really forgive themselves.
Okay.
In psychology, when you forgive yourself, you definitely have accepted the situation. You've seen that absolutely at this level, there is limited thing you can do, but all you can do is to take care of yourself. Once people begin to forgive themselves, then they have already started achieving very strong psychological healing.
Okay.
Number two that I would also recommend is ask for help, seek for help. Many people do not have the capacity to really deal with a lot of mental issues. So sometimes when they reach out to their friends, their family, they could really be able to support it. Then also seek for help from professionals. That is also a very challenging issue to talk about, because in Nigeria we don't even have adequate. Exactly.
Yes.
We actually don't have many psychological centers. As I speak to you today, we have a bill which is called the Nigerian Council for Psychologists, to set up a council for psychologists.
Like a professional body to regulate the practice of psychology.
The practice of psychology today and counseling is done by pastors and done by imam and done by religious bodies, which is good. I don't want anyone to misunderstand me. But the problem is that there are many things people want to share with their religious leader that they cannot comfortably share with them. So if you really find hospitals or places where you can get this kind of help, that will be very helpful.
Okay, that will be very helpful. But when some distressing situations happen in some countries, you see schools inviting psychologists to talk to their students. You see organizations inviting psychologists. There are some of my friends in the UK who were given days off. They are Nigerians in the UK. But a day after the Lekki massacre, 2010-2020, I have a couple of friends who are given day off by their office. So we know you are traumatized by what's happening in your country. Please stay back and try to get yourself back. So do you think that organizations in Nigeria, especially those that have young people, could have programs, and even governments, for different cadres of persons who may have suffered one loss or the other, and even people in government, I'm sure a good number of them may also have been traumatized. So who will help them?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And one thing I've really suggested both in the past and going forward is to use the easy ways to provide this kind of framework for people. Online psychological support. We have online courses that people can really take. So even if you don't have sufficient funds, or even you don't have the resources to ask people to stay away from work,
Yes.
it will also be important to ask people to leverage on this online platform for them to get
For those that have access to it anyway.
access to it, yeah.
All right, Runcie, one will feel for us to continue talking about this for a very long time, but I really appreciate you. And also Adaora Onyechere, who shared her very traumatic story on this program. Essentially what we're trying to say is mental health is very important, or the psychological aspect of every experience, and every Nigerian, especially those who are directly and indirectly affected by the events of the past weeks, including government officials who also have very difficult moments trying to control this, should seek, to get some psychological healing from this going forward. So that's all we can have today on the program. We really thank you, all our viewers in Nigeria and around the world, for keeping faith and all your support. Do stay with us, same station, same time next week. Don't fail to watch it. Keep the comments and the reactions coming on our social media handles displayed on your screen. And also don't fail to watch as many times as you like on our YouTube platform. My name is still Dr. Lars Eze. Bye for now.